Welcome to the Beautiful Step Podcast,
where we
run,
stomp,
tiptoe,
and tango into the confusing
but beautiful
world of togetherness. We are your hosts, Kris
and Charity.
Now, let's go make our together even better.
The other day, you used a term that I hadn't heard before. Well, actually, our son said it to you or something.
Virtue signaling?
Virtue signaling.
I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was so appropriate.
Yeah. Tell me what you think it means.
Well, I'll start by saying I think we are living in an age of moral elitism. There's like this whole competition to, who can be viewed as the most empathetic, who can be viewed as the most just, who can be like, and it really, and the reason why I say viewed as is because, there's just so much virtual stuff going on, but I know that it's often the case, especially in the, type of work that we've done our whole lives, is you have these people who are giving, like they're giving off this sense of how like altruistic they are, yet they're super lazy about what they really believe in. They don't necessarily, they're theorists, not practitioners, right?
Oh, okay.
And so virtue, you know what I mean? And so virtue signaling is this idea of I want everyone to think that I'm this virtuous, moral person. And I really care about, like, for instance, racism, right? I'm a social justice warrior. I'm an advocate for the injustices that are going on during, race right now. And look at this, my black friend is with me. You know what I mean? It's that like, wait, what? Like, you never had a black friend in your life. You know what I mean? And now that's full on virtue signaling. It's like, it's horrible.
So you're not saying that everybody kind of like making a stand is doing that. You're just saying like there's a phenomenon where a lot of people are putting themselves out there as having a really strong conviction about something when they actually don't.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I would like to say it's funny, but I think it's ridiculous, and it's kind of sad. It's like, because I say I am this, I must be. Like, no,
sure.
You should probably back that up. You should probably do some things, advocate for some things,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And there is an element, I think, where a lot of us in these times are finding ourselves where we are recognizing things about ourselves that we didn't know.
100%.
Like where we're coming from, or the constructs we've come from. And
there were so many conversations, and I know this is tangential, but there were so many conversations I had with my black friends where I realized I was apologizing to him.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm sorry, man. I honestly didn't know.
Right. I think, we're just getting hit in the face with like all the things that our history, has been harmful to people, and we're recognizing that. So that's not what we're talking about. No. We're just talking about kind of that fake, you're putting yourself out there.
It brings out all of this moral elitism, this moral competition.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, because everyone's scared, and everyone's like wanting to look good. And so it brings out this false signaling stuff.
Sure. Yeah. For some people. And I think the thing that I see it doing that's really harmful is this moral elitism.
Yeah.
Is that it is dividing. It is causing great division in our country, even because we are othering people even on moral issues that we ourselves believe are the standard.
Right.
We believe our moral standard should naturally be everyone's moral standard.
Should extend to everybody.
We should be able to project that and then be able to judge each other on the standard that we think exists.
Right.
And this has been really harmful and continues to be harmful. And we don't see it often that we are doing that. Like, we'll look at other people and say, they're so black and white. They're really divisive. It's causing this like divide. Well,
can I just interrupt for a second? Yeah. Is it that idea of like, why are you holding me to your moral standard?
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like, I don't believe the same things, and I wasn't raised the same way, or
Yeah.
Right? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And often I think we make the assumption that when somebody isn't abiding by the moral standard we think is the actual standard, because we don't just think it's a moral standard for ourselves. We really do often believe it as a moral standard for society or a community.
Yeah.
And we then make the assumption that they either don't know and that's why they're doing that. Or they're simply bad people, and that's why they've decided to do that. Like
either they're ignorant or they're just horrible.
Right. We have a hard time with the idea that actually maybe they're not ignorant or a bad person. Maybe they just have a very different view on that than you do. But
and we have to live with that. We have to deal with that. We have to, we have to operate together.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to talk about this because I find that actually maybe, I teach ethics at a university.
Right.
I teach business ethics, and I always start the semester with explaining the difference between morals and ethics because people think they're the same and they're not. And it's usually like people will, you'll hear statements like that's unethical. And I'm like, well, that's not actually what that means or what that is. So let's make a good distinction because I find that usually my students are like, oh, wait, that's not what I thought that was.
Wow. Yeah.
So we talked about morals. Well, morals are your internal belief system. You yourself, Kris Carmody, has his own morals, his own set of morals. I have my own set of morals. Those are the things that I've decided are right and wrong behavior.
For myself.
Okay. Now,
that's morals. Morals is me.
Yep. We just talked about how that can be projected out. But really what morals are your internal compass of what you believe right and wrong behaviors are.
Okay. Got it.
So you have this moral compass. It's yours. The difference is that ethics is actually about an agreed upon standard of behavior by more than one person.
Aha.
Very different.
Very different.
So we could have, in order to have an ethical standard, you actually have to have an interpersonal, there needs to be more than one person. You and I need to have decided what is the agreed upon standard of right and wrong behavior between the two of us.
That's so crazy. So when I start off with something like, hey, that's unethical, it's totally different than saying, hey, that's immoral.
Yes. Right. One is kind of a personal conviction, and the other one is what we've decided is okay and not okay in whatever context we're in. So if it's a workplace, you might think something is unethical because that is the ethos of that company is we've decided this is right and wrong behavior here, or within a civilization or a community or a country, this is right and wrong behavior here. And like, let me just give a few examples.
Yeah, go.
We look at lots of things. In the United States, it's getting more common maybe, but it's still not legal to have more than one wife.
Wait, say that again?
It's not legal to have more than one wife in the United States. Like actually to be legally married to more than one person.
I thought there was like a mountain in Utah that you could climb that is like sort of...
to be a polygamist? I don't know, but
okay,
but legally,
but typically,
right,
sure.
Okay. But in other countries, some other countries, that's legal.
Right.
So we could look at that and we could say, well, does the law determine what's ethical? Or should we say, no, the United States has decided that polygamy is wrong, and therefore every other country should decide that polygamy is wrong.
Right, because I'm looking at it like, what an immoral thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But really what they have done as a society is decided what is right and wrong behavior, and that's what they've adopted. And people will often think that the law is what generates ethics. I don't do something because it's illegal, and that's what makes it right or wrong. But that's not actually true. The law doesn't create ethics. Ethics creates the law.
Okay. Say more.
I'll just give an example.
Yeah.
Okay. We decided over the years, right, in America, I'm just going to talk about America, that we believed same-sex marriage, which used to not be legal. We believed that people that were in same-sex relationships should be able to get marriage and be afforded the same legal protections as married heterosexual couples.
And the advantages and tax breaks. All,
sure.
Yeah. And that's per capita. We're thinking like most people are agreeing to this new ethic.
Right. So we decided, and what happened is because of our kind of federalist system, we decided in certain states that are deemed more, liberal in the media or whatever,
right,
would say, we believe that the general consensus of our society, the majority, would say that we think they should be able to legally marry same-sex couples. So then you saw states deciding it was legal in their state. But it still was federally illegal, right? You could, right. What was honored in one state wasn't honored in another. Well, this is the example of how ethics creates laws. That happened at the state level. And then what do? All of a sudden, all the states are saying, no, we agree with that. We think that it should be the ethical standard that same-sex couples should be married, which then pushed it up to the Supreme Court so that the federal government had to then make a distinction and say, okay, we have a new standard. So what I'm getting to is that the idea, the what is acceptable behavior in a society is actually what pushes forth the law. It's not the other way around. We don't have a law and then we decide that it's ethical.
Got it.
We have a thing that we think is ethical and then we make it the law. I think, marijuana use is the same thing. We've got tons of states legalizing the use of marijuana, still federally illegal. But then you look at it and you go, okay, well then you have Biden's new thing of saying like, we shouldn't be keeping people in prison for, drug use of this magnitude for marijuana use. Right. So it's becoming more and more common, which means that the state laws are going to then dictate that the federal law probably be changed in this area and for legalization.
Right.
Because we've decided as a society, we started to look at the behavior that we used to think is right and wrong or wrong and say, we don't really think it's that wrong. Or now we have other things. We just talked about moral elitism. We have other things that we didn't used to think were wrong. But now we're like for instance, or we used to think were right. Certain behaviors against different people or the way we looked at things. Right. We thought they were right. And now we're saying, we think that is wrong. Like we think that type of thinking is wrong. And so now we're deciding as a society what's right and wrong. And it's changing the ethical framework or the standard of that community.
So let me ask you this. We grew up with a phenomenon, institution almost, called the moral majority. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, do you think that morally America is going down the drain? Because I would think this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I would think that if we're making all of these, what we now call ethical actions.
Sure.
Hey, smoking pot, that's not unethical.
Right.
Hey, two guys get together and get married and have a child. You know what? That's not unethical.
Right.
And so you have these movements. So I guess my question would be, do you think that the moral fabric or what was the moral fabric is now, that goes first and then the ethics change and then the laws change? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I think that's a question that would assume a certain set of morals that I don't prescribe to.
Isn't that interesting though?
Yeah.
We've been sort of told this is moral, right? In Western society in America, right? And then, so now all of this, everything that was immoral was sort of mixed in with unethical and against the law.
Yes.
And now we have this, I think it's really interesting, just defining the terms.
Yes.
Can help us sort of separate, wait, what you prescribe to and I prescribe to are not the same moral fabric.
Right. I mean, if you were to take, what people would say is the Judeo-Christian moral framework that many people say is the equivalent of what America was built on, which is a fallacy, but a well-believed issue or construct, is that you would have to think that those morals, that framework is the truth.
You would have to adopt it as your moral construct, your moral framework.
Right.
Sure.
But here's the thing about moral frameworks. You get them from somewhere. You don't just automatically decide. When I grew up, I didn't have a choice of deciding for myself necessarily what was right and wrong. We're all taught what's right and wrong by someone or something. Either circumstances have taught us that, people have taught us that, media has taught us that, people we look up to have taught us that, actual authority figures that in our life that we have given authority or that have taken authority in our life have taught us that. We're all just, regurgitating what has been input into our life that kind of creates that initial moral structure.
So in so many ways, you feel like you're first-handed morals.
Absolutely.
And then you start to realize what is not true, what is true. And this, so I heard a statement the other day I thought was really important. A choice not based in knowledge is meaningless. And I was like,
yes,
that's going to take me a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because a choice that really isn't informed really doesn't matter.
Right.
Because you don't believe it anyway. Like
it wasn't really a choice.
Exactly.
It wasn't really a choice. You're just doing what you have been brought up to do.
And so for my choices to mean anything, I have to have some knowledge about the choice I'm making.
Yeah, I mean,
like I can't just be ignorant. I can't just be in the dark. I can't just be like, well, what is it? How does this relationship affect, the rest of America or this, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. For it to be a choice, there has to be an alternate answer or an alternate response.
Sure.
So I was thinking about like how mean kids are. Like I remember being so floored when our kids were little and they would go to school and they would come back and they would say something that a kid has said to another kid. And
brutal.
It's horrifying. And you're like, oh my goodness, like this, because they just blurt out whatever. Well, here's the deal. They don't recognize that that's an unethical thing because they don't know the agreement. They're just saying what they feel inside or what someone else has told them. They're just regurgitating that.
Right.
But then comes the day when they have an experience of that same terribly hurtful thing happening to them. Mm. And what it does is it all of a sudden brings another choice, brings another option, another perspective. What it does is it brings empathy to the table. Mm. And they're like, all of a sudden like, oh, now I have personal knowledge of getting my butt handed to me in this area or somebody saying this really mean thing to me. Mm. And now I'm weighing what I'm doing compared to what other people might do and how I know it impacts people now.
Right. That's a choice based in knowledge.
Yes, because all of a sudden they have it.
And it's extremely meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting is that when you said that quote to me earlier, and you were like, okay, well, do you become more convinced as you've kind of like have more knowledge about things? And I started to think, and I said to you, I actually think I was much more convinced about my choices before I had knowledge about something. Because if you don't know the other thing, of course you're convinced. I mean, you're doubling down on everything, all your confirmation biases there.
Sure.
There's no other option. You weren't taught a different way to look at that, a different way to think about that. So you're actually the most convinced the more ignorant you are.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
And here's so for instance, I'll just try this out on you. Mm-hmm. I have this, well, I was watching this masterclass where this gentleman was talking about eating toward your values.
Right.
Or within your values, and instantly kind of becomes a moral, ethical thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh yeah, no, true. And his whole pretense was, eat ecologically. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I started thinking about it. I'm like, man, not only was he saying eat ecologically, but he was also saying like eat, sort of based on your ethics and what you believe about people and justice. And,
sure.
And you have all of this food industry who's really misusing human beings, like, in so many of the fields and all these kinds of things. And then also you have this beefing industry or whatever. You have all these different industries who are letting off all this carbon gas and all these kinds of things. And so, and I'm looking at myself and I'm thinking, a choice every day that I make is to eat 3 times a day sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'm making that choice and I'm asking myself, how much do I know? Mm. And it's strange because I'm 50 years old and I was searching myself as to like, wait, why do I eat the way that I do? Like, I still have no problem eating beef, pork, that kind of stuff. I'm not looking whether it's grass-fed or not.
Okay.
And the biggest part for me is the knowledge that I have, having grown up in Alaska, having been so often, like all the time, having firsthand experience and interaction with the earth, and knowing how if you let yourself go for one season, if you let things go and you're not like sort of making sure that like the earth around you is not overtaking you, it's like we call it beating back the jungle. Like you can have one season where you're not doing that, and the earth will literally just swallow you up no matter what you do to it. Like you could go and you could cut all this stuff down, you could do all these things, and it's just going to grow back. It's going to pop up. And so I have this knowledge about how the earth heals and how the earth is so powerful and so much more powerful than me. And so when we're talking about this idea of like we are destroying the earth and we talk about how fragile it is, the knowledge that I have, the experiential knowledge that I have, I'm totally conflicted.
Yes.
I'm like, it doesn't really make sense, because I'm like, have you ever really just tried to live off the earth? Like, have you been around the earth when she's just really extreme? and so I am like, I wrestle with that, but at the same time, I do know, right, that I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And so I'm more willing than ever, right, to base my eating choices on valuing the earth. And it's so hard for me to like not think that some of these people who are doing this research, you know, live in some apartment somewhere and have never been out of the city or never climbed a mountain or anything, or never really, you know, been exposed to rain, wind, and snow, and like, you know what I mean, these types of actual things where you're watching the earth just completely, you know, rejuvenate. So anyway, the whole idea is I have a moral, I have a conviction about the way I eat that is going to influence the ethical standard around me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're going to come to the table with that perspective.
With the perspective of like, I don't think the earth is quite as fragile as we are saying.
Right. But then someone else who has a different experiential knowledge,
exactly,
which is just as valid, has a very strong conviction that you're wrong and that they are experiencing it in a very different way. And
right.
And
we're both coming to the table with all this meaning, you know, and all of this belief.
Yep.
And that's what's so fascinating when you start talking about ethics.
Yeah.
Is we go, okay, it gets interesting.
Yes. And it's very dangerous to kind of assume. And this is where we go wrong, is we assume a lot about what should be ethical without actually having the conversation about what should be ethical. I want to just I always do this example in class is that, okay, tell me, you know, when you're driving,
okay,
how many miles over the speed limit is it okay if you're on a freeway to drive?
Well, the freeway right here, the 215, everybody goes 74 miles an hour. So it's, I mean, there's most of the time it's like 11. When I was a kid, it was like you could go, I think it was 7 miles over the speed limit, because if you go a certain amount over, you get a ticket and it's this amount, and they won't stop you at this. So within 10 or 11 miles an hour every time, no problem.
Okay, so the first thing you said people normally go 74, which is like 9 miles an hour over the speed limit.
Yes.
And then you said, but I remember hearing as a kid, 7 was okay. You were safe. 5 to 7, and you're kind of fine. They're not going to stop you.
Less than 10.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Well, what's interesting about that is if you ask other people, they might say, and usually when I do this in a class, people are all over the place. You know, a lot of people will cite the same 5 to 7, which is something I was told too, but total wives' tale, right? That's not actually a thing.
Well, what it was there's a certain amount that you get fined per mile an hour over the speed limit.
Sure.
And they're not even going to stop you for under, $200 or something. So that's why it's like you push that threshold. You're like, if I stay at 7, they don't have any real reason to stop me, because, you know, you see what I'm getting
right,
at?
But, you know, we don't, like, that is going to vary by police department and by police officer. But all that's kind of like made up. But what's funny about it is we kind of accept that as a community. So to make my point, we could all say different things. And I've had people in class say every mile over is against the law and wrong. It's unethical. because they came from an experience where somebody sped and really hurt somebody they loved. So in their mind, that's a non-negotiable. Like, we don't even mess with that.
Yeah, I remember riding with, I have a couple friends who are felons, and they won't go 1 mile an hour over the speed. Like, no,
right. The law,
slow your roll.
The law is the law in their mind, like that kind of thing. So, but in general, in society, we have kind of adopted that there is a fudge between what is the law and what is actually like speeding in our mind. If we saw our friend going over 5 and we were in the car, going over like 5 miles over, we probably wouldn't be like, whoa, you're really making me nervous, because we've kind of accepted that this is the ethical standard.
It's
for what's
neither
okay.
Unethical or immoral for that person to go 5 miles an hour.
Sure.
Yeah.
But at some point we would be like triggered, like, you're doing the wrong thing here. This is wrong behavior for society. So very different. So what I'm saying, to make my point right, is like, there's a law that exists, but that's not what we're basing what's right and wrong on.
Wow.
We're basing it on what we all have kind of like subconsciously agreed to.
The hidden rules.
The hidden rules. It's the same thing. You could say, I could ask you, do you believe it's wrong to murder people?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe it's wrong in war?
Ooh.
At what point does the decision or the rightness, wrongness within a society change?
Some guy walks in here, I'm with my daughter, and he starts to somehow violate her. If I didn't kill him, I'd be the monster, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is, or it often becomes a thing of like, when people are deciding, I'll use this example. You have to, you have a family member who has now basically become totally a vegetable. Like, they have no more brain activity.
Right.
They didn't leave any, directions. You're going to have to make the decision. You have people on kind of all sides saying you should pull the plug. You don't know what to do. Then you have other people saying you shouldn't. And you're kind of having to make this decision. But then there are certain groups of people that would say, you should always do this. This should be the general rule of thumb. And then you have other people that say, this is the general rule of thumb.
Yeah.
And it varies so significantly. And we often think that how we would do it should be what other people do. Like, you shouldn't keep them in suffering. Or other people would say, like, you have no right to make that call. I actually did a poll of students and asked them, like, okay, if you had a loved one that died a tragic death, and for some reason they had suffered the last 5 minutes of their life because they got in an accident and they didn't die right away, would you want the doctor to tell you that they had died right away and didn't actually experience any suffering?
Yes, I would want him to ease that for me.
So in that situation, and then other people would be like, no, I would want to know exactly.
Interesting.
But some people would think, that's so cruel. What is that going to do? The doctor should absolutely ease your pain and just tell you that they died on impact and there was no, there was
yes,
no
I mean,
suffering.
To me, I would think everyone would answer the question like, hey, the person's gone. And what good is it? Like, you're not going to do anything but haunt the survivors by saying like, oh yeah, she choked to death after 17 minutes of this, on the steering wheel or something. Like, what point is that?
Yeah. What's interesting is that I've run this poll 4 times. It's always a split, almost 50-50 every time.
Okay, let me ask you this, put you on the spot. What would you prefer? The doctor lie to you, or would it be very literal?
Normally, I'm a very literal person. I don't like to be lied to in any way. I want to know exactly what happened. But in that situation, I see no benefit to knowing the truth. And therefore, like, it would probably make me feel better if I thought that they didn't have any suffering. So I'd want to be lied to.
So if you were a doctor, you would lie?
In that situation, yeah. And so
I think I would too if I were a doctor.
This is the interesting thing. It not only impacts the people that are hearing the lie or the truth.
Right.
It impacts the person who's doing it. They're making an ethical standard call on like, what is the ethical thing for me to do right now? Given what I understand about our relationship with this person, like my relationship with this person, my relationship at this hospital, what other doctors are doing, there is this, we have all decided that this is kind of how we operate. This would be the right thing or the wrong thing to do. You have states where you say, in some states, I think, like Oregon, where you have like right to die policies where people can, if they're terminally ill, they can decide to
euthanize them. Yeah.
Somebody, do euthanization. And then you have other states that where it's absolutely not legal, and that would be considered murder or, assisted murder if you had that situation. But all that has been decided kind of with everybody. The whole point of this is that we get backward when we really feel like this is the way it should be. And then we make judgments about other people based on what we think was the agreed upon standard. But we didn't actually decide that standard.
Wow.
We want to say like, this is the way it should be, or those people are wrong because they think that. But then we don't actually know if that's the majority. We're making lots of assumptions about what the majority has decided to do.
That's so true.
And we are so quick to judge other people and judge other civilizations because we say like they're doing things wrong. I always kind of like internally, I shouldn't say chuckle, but I always think to myself when people talk about like the horrificness of child labor. And I'm like, yes, child labor is horrific. But how are you defining child labor?
Yeah.
Because you might say child labor and think one thing, and I think another thing. And then I might say to you, okay, you think, a kid working at age 12 in a factory is really terrible. And then there's all these things that you haven't really thought about. Like, wait, if you go to like middle Illinois in a farming community,
Iowa, Indiana, Kansas, Montana,
really, like, or even
those 12-year-olds are driving trucks around.
They're not only driving trucks around, they're tilling the ground.
Sure.
Let's say your family owns a restaurant. I don't know many families that own restaurants where the kids didn't start working in those restaurants at some point at a very young age.
We have a favorite Greek restaurant. All the kids are, and it's like this cute thing where the kid comes up and gives you water or something, or, and you're like, and we've had the ethical conversation. Like, man, is that right or wrong? I mean, what's she going to do with these kids and this and that? And it's like, and then we kind of go back and forth. We're like, yeah, they're learning a work ethic right now. And I'm sure she loves them. And we've known these people for years.
Yeah.
So it's like this, what do you do?
Right. And so you could say, wait a second. If that's what the family has decided that is needed to pay the bills, just like, how is that different than an American farming family, particularly maybe 50 years ago? Or like, so
that's the thing is there is such a thing as we are all born into disadvantages in some way that our parents are working on, and trying to work out and stuff. And so that is a very interesting topic, and it's not carte blanche.
No. And we do it about all sorts of things.
Sure.
I have some friends who are really, they have strong opinions about not frequenting certain businesses. They'll boycott things like Chick-fil-A. And, Okay.
Yeah, because Chick-fil-A, they are,
they're
homosexual
they don't,
and, won't open on Sunday and all these different things.
Right.
And it's just their moral is different than this person's moral.
Right. What they've made a decision about that, right? Okay. So what's interesting about that, and I used to, when I was a stockbroker in the 90s,
right,
it became a thing for the first time that mutual funds would have socially responsible mutual funds, where you could go and you could say, I refuse to invest in tobacco. I refuse to invest in the alcohol industry. So find me a mutual fund of a bunch of companies that doesn't include any of those categories. What I'm saying is that's great. It's very idealistic and very great. And we should be able to invest according to our morals.
Absolutely.
And we should invest according to our morals. And we should make these determinations about what companies we don't want to invest in or frequent or be a consumer of.
Hey, that's America, baby.
But here's the thing. None of our society is removed or isolated from the other. Just because you're not investing in a tobacco company doesn't mean that the company that you invested in that has nothing to do with tobacco isn't somehow buying supplies from other companies that are doing very unethical things.
Sure.
It's just that the farther away it is from you, the more you can remove yourself from that immediate acknowledgement of an unethical thing, the more you're like, oh, okay, I don't see it, therefore it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And we think that we're like making this very altruistic stance. And I'm like, well, it's a kind of, you're doing that and it's making you feel better. It's a little bit
of a virtue signal.
Exactly. It's making you feel better, but let's be honest. That company is buying from other companies that are doing other things, and you really can't get away with it. It's like, I always have to laugh when people say things like, I refuse to buy, clothes from H&M and these places. And I'm like, okay, but do you think, and I think I made a joke about it in one of the podcasts where you were like making a thing about your Scotch
and soda. Yeah. It's quality stuff. This is a Scotch and soda coat.
Right. It's very, very rare you're going to find a company that every source of all their sources, all their labor, everything is like from this very backed up ethical. At some point in the food chain,
everything sells out.
There's going to be someone who's doing something unethical.
Oh yeah. I mean, Etsy started out real neat, but it's just a huge, everybody on there saying it's handmade goods. There's barely any handmade goods on Etsy. Like, it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to remove ourselves from
that's
it.
So
we want to like take a step back and say, like, that's not, it's not really me, and therefore it's easier for me to like think that that's an unethical thing.
Right. I will say I do appease myself in some ways, because, okay, so for instance, that could get very sort of defeatist.
Sure.
And what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I even have moral values? Because everything is so interwoven and, like the man has control over everything. But I do have those definitely moral convictions about what I believe about people that do give me a choice. Like, for instance, when Carl's Jr. was doing all of that sex to sell burgers. I don't know if they're still doing that.
No,
but stopped. It was like,
it wasn't actually sex, but like really,
like these women in, barely in a bikini or whatever, and like
basically orgasming on a burger.
Yeah. Sexually like, and I remember talking to my boys about it and even friends about it. And they're like, honestly, man, why is everyone freaking out if Carl's Jr. wants to like use this as a thing? Then why don't they just use it as a thing? And I remember saying, okay, well, I would say I would take a stronger stance, because if at any point you're going to put a woman in the same choice category as fried chicken, and which one, like, it's competing for your, like, for your
lust.
Desire. Yeah. And it's like, dude, like, wait, what have we become?
You're right.
You know? And so I was like, wait, no, not even close.
Right.
It takes the dignity of a woman and likens it to fried chicken. Like, okay, now I can kind of see this is an immoral thing for me. Like,
sure.
This is not how I view humanity. It's not how I view women. Okay.
Yeah.
And so once I was able to help them with that knowledge, they were able to have a more meaningful sense of what they were actually doing.
Right. And that's good. I mean, we should have those convictions about things, and we should not frequent companies that we believe are,
absolutely.
But we should also recognize that that's a very
moral thing. Right?
Well, it's not just a moral thing, but it's a limited perspective.
Okay, good.
We're basing it on what we know, what we think we know.
Right.
We actually, when we talked about that choice issue, maybe we don't even know maybe there wasn't even a choice, because in order to have a choice, you need the alternate reality.
Yeah.
And we don't maybe know the other reality of what's happening.
Sure.
So I think we just have to realize that like things aren't as effective as we think. And also they're not as be all end all, which means we can lessen the pressure with how we're judging other people on their ethical standards, because like, hey, they're making a decision as well based on what they believe they know.
That's so important.
But
I remember that, like, especially in, religion, organized religion, being a leader of, religious practice and in the church and that type of thing. One of the things that came online right away was, hey, why are you holding like a non-Christian person to a Christian standard? Like, that's just unfair. And I remember catching that pretty early on, which it really diffused a lot of, judgment on my part. And it also like infused the empathy part of it, where it's like, their moral standards are different than yours. So why are you projecting on?
Yes. And I think that's so important, but also it does have a little stink of they don't know any better.
Of course it does.
Right?
Of course it does. Which is, everyone who has a moral conviction is going to have a hard time not extending that to the other person.
Yeah. But what I think a good realization is that we should maybe have the assumption that instead of they don't know any better and that's why they're doing that, is like, no, they know as much as I do and they've made a different call on it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
maybe there's something I could learn.
Yes.
I think that's important.
Yeah, maybe there's something I could learn, and maybe they made a very, very informed decision. Maybe their decision was more informed than yours.
Sure.
But they just came to a different conclusion.
Yeah, maybe the information was exactly the same and they came to a different conclusion. And it's like, well, man, that's kind of an interesting phenomenon.
Yes. Yeah. And how hypocritical we all are.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the point. How hypocritical we all are in this, that we'll think something is really a good judgment call and like a definitive. And then we don't see in our own selves that we have kind of distanced ourselves from it, but are doing the same thing. I was reading this book, phenomenal author, but the book that I was reading was called Predictably Irrational. And it's basically a behavioral economist talking about why we do the things we do with our money.
Okay, right.
And I find, and I teach this in my class too, because we talk about like labor ethics.
Sure.
And
big deal.
Right. And so if I was to ask you, for instance, let's just give this example. I call you, our kids are little, they're still in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
I call you and you're working at an office for somebody. And I say, hey, Olivia needs to do her homework and we're out of pencils and it requires a number 2 pencil. Can you grab one from the office before you come home?
I'll grab a handful.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. What if each of those pencils had a price tag on them that said, this pencil cost this company $2.50? Would you feel as good about taking a handful of pencils?
I mean, it would definitely slow me down.
What if they weren't pencils? What if it just, the company hadn't bought the pencils yet and the money was in the till?
No way I would do that.
And I'd be like, hey, can you grab $2.50 from the till and then stop by the store on the way home to buy a pencil?
I'd be like, no way.
Right? But the thing is,
wow.
What we're talking about is this is the exact monetary, it's the same thing. But we view one as stealing and one as totally our right to be able to do.
Is there a loophole here that I'm not seeing?
No, it points out the fact that like, because we've removed the ability to see how much that cost, we no longer view it as a moral decision anymore. It's just, we just consider it our right, which is how people come to their decisions in ethics.
Wow.
And I'll go into that in a second, but I want to, in this regard, I want to point out how crazy it is that we do not understand what stealing is when it comes to our employer.
Yeah, go
Listen
ahead.
to these numbers.
Give us some stats.
Okay,
yeah.
This is 2004. This is out of that book, Predictably Irrational.
By the way, I hate statistics because I'm always like, yeah, where'd these numbers come from? But this is profound enough to where there's something to it for sure.
I love statistics, but okay, this is 2004 numbers. All right, ready? The total cost of robberies in the United States in 2004 was $525 million. So actually like robbing people, 525 million, and which meant that like the average robbery was about $1,300 in things stolen. Okay. That's 2004, right? Same 2004. Guess how much employee theft and fraud was estimated for at that same year?
Twice as much,
Which would be about $1 billion.
$1 billion.
Okay. $600 billion in employee theft and fraud.
Dude.
$600 billion. So If you were to take all, like, just employee theft, it's so much higher than the cost of every burglary, all larceny, all other theft, even auto theft in all of the United States. It's so much higher than all of those things combined. Is employee theft and fraud. Wow is right. It's the same thing, like, and I'll use this in classes, like these numbers of like how much actual merchandise employees steal by far surpasses usually any shoplifting numbers.
Man.
But if you were to ask those same employees, are you a thief? They would be like, hell no.
Yeah. What do you think?
No, I don't view myself as a thief. Don't you dare call me a thief. And I'm like, well, what is the difference actually between somebody walking out with a shirt that costs $25 and you wasting an hour of your time when the company is paying you $25? What is the difference actually?
Wow.
You've just decided in your mind that it's different because in actuality, it's not different at all. So there's this phenomenon that as soon as we kind of like remove ourselves or think that the system is kind of rigged.
Oh, yeah.
We feel fine stealing and we won't call it stealing in our mind. We'll have a different category for it. It's just kind of like it becomes our right. For instance, in the I own an insurance company, right? So it's one of these things where you go, well, this was an interesting fact, right? $24 million are estimated in bogus add-on claims. So I have a theft. I'm claiming my theft. I'm going to just add a few other things, or I'm going to inflate the value of them.
Sure.
$24 billion estimated in 2004.
$24 billion?
$24 billion estimated in 2004 of just add-on kind of fraudulent little. It's not, now those people didn't call the insurance company and make a totally bogus claim. They were robbed or something else happened, but they've just kind of like tweaked it a little bit because they viewed that. And the reason that they were able to do this in their mind morally was because they were like, well, I kind of get screwed by the insurance company and therefore it's my right to kind of screw the insurance company.
So true. And that's, I mean, there's been times I've walked out of Lowe's, and you know this about me, and you've like hit me over the head, where I'm like, oh yeah, they didn't charge me for that. And I didn't go back. And it is stealing. I mean, hey, guilty. But the way I justify it is there's been times when I've gone to Lowe's and been double charged, or there's been times I've gone to Lowe's and it was like, I left that thing in my cart and I'm already an hour and a half, down the road. And it's like, never going to see that again.
Right. Or you get a delivery and it's missing 3 items and you're not.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we just had a big thing of lumber this summer delivered, an hour and a half away from civilization, and bunch of middle of the boards were rotten. It's like, oh, well.
Yeah. And what are you going to do? You're probably not going to go back and do that.
Exactly.
But there is a limit to that. So for instance, if you walk out of Lowe's or Walmart and there was a pack of gum that you forgot to do, would you walk back in and return it? Well, maybe not. And even if you did, they might, the cashier or somebody might be like, just take it. I'm not going to deal with it.
That's happened to me a few different times.
Sure. Which that's a whole nother thing. Like, what makes the employee think that it's actually their right to give away inventory? That's not. But even so, there would be a limit. If they didn't scan a new, iPhone, that would be in the stealing category in your mind. You would be like, oh, I'm walking back in there to say that they didn't do that because I'm kind of looking around to see if somebody's going to be following me home. Right. So there's a standard, like a limit that you've kind of decided is okay. And some people have a really low limit there and some people have a really high limit there.
Yeah. What's the craziest part of this phenomenon is I can quote Donald Trump here.
Ooh, in a positive way? Okay, bring it.
Well, no. But I remember him quoting in something I heard. He said, if somebody hits you, the way to be successful is to strike back, but hit them twice as hard.
Oh, I remember this. Like when he was campaigning first or something.
Hit them twice as hard. And, and we have a lot of people, you know what I mean? And what that says in so many ways, and I'm not saying this is what Donald Trump meant. So
who knows what Donald Trump means? Yeah.
But I do know that there is a tendency in me, for sure, that my son just got robbed. They took so much stuff.
Oh, yeah.
a $10,000 microphone, right?
Yep.
And now we're like, well, is the insurance going to cover it? And we were back and forth on all this. And I was instantly thinking to myself, like, do whatever it takes to get that thing covered. Because that's like a part of your livelihood. Like, just do whatever it takes. And so what happens is I instantly start to think, well, if you're not going to be who you're saying you're going to be, then I don't have to be who I say I have to be. You know what I mean? It's
Yes.
that whole thing. Like, if you aren't going to live up to any morals, then obviously I don't have to live up to any morals. And you don't have morals, I don't have morals. And it's all of a sudden you're going, wait. Hold on. It's Martin Luther King.
Mm.
He was like, these white folks are going to beat us. They're going to like burn us. They're going to hang us. They're going to do the most unfathomable things. And you're going to want to reciprocate.
Yeah.
But here's what we're going to do. Because this is our moral belief.
Mm-hmm.
This is our moral fabric. And this is the way we win. We're going to go and sit down cross-legged in the middle of the street. And we're not going to fight. And we're not going to do these things. And we're going to win it, And so there's this, what's coming online as you're talking about this is that idea of people are stretched morally when other people are acting immorally.
Yes. It'll test but what Luther did, and I think this is a great example. What he did was he helped them create a different ethical standard.
He saved so much of America's ethical standards.
He said this is their ethical standard that they're abiding by, but we ourselves are going to create a different ethical standard, and we are going to operate in that way. Right. And what you're saying is so true. It's like people want to retaliate, but how often do we retaliate? And who we're retaliating against is not actually the person that harmed us. For instance, you bring up the robbery and you say like, well, I want to then cheat the insurance company because somebody robbed from me. Well, you're not retaliating against the person who robbed from you.
Right. You're doing nothing to that person.
No, you're actually then harming everyone else who's in your same situation. All the other victims who are in your same situation, because now their insurance rates are going up because people like you file fraudulent claims. I'm not saying you, but what I'm saying is it actually has the wrong unintended effect, but we think we're getting justice.
And that's the thing is it's hard to see, but for whatever moment I was doing that in my mind and I was suggesting like do whatever it takes, that kind of thing. That's the exact same mindset as the thief who broke into his car. Do whatever it takes. Yep. I've got to live. I'm going to,
someone stole from me.
I'm entitled to this because I had a bad hand dealt to me or whatever their justification is. And it's that whole thing of like, a thief begets a thief. It's like stealing begets thieves. You know what I mean? And that's that thing where Sufjan Stevens has that song, about John Wayne Gacy. And it's the most bone-chilling thing you'll ever listen to. Because he's like, he took off all their clothes for them. And all this crazy, like, and like he gave him a kiss, but then he buried him under his house and stuff. Yeah. And this chilling recollection and rendition of take on what John Wayne Gacy did. And then the worst part is Sufjan's like, and on my best behavior, I'm just like him. And you're like, wait, what? And you're screaming, no, you're not. But it is like we do trade those mindsets. It's like we fall into these same exact things, man, where it's like we're calling, immoral on this person, or we're calling, thieves, I hate them. And yet at the same time, it's like, can you see where you have compromised your morals? Yes, it is the phenomenon right now in the labor market of this quietly quitting. Quitting. Have you heard this term? Quietly quitting, and it's kind of a big movement within, especially the Gen Y, Z, like. This is a stick it to the mandiosis. Yeah, I mean, and basically it's kind of this idea that like you're just gonna phone it in.
especially it came online really with COVID and people working remotely. It's just like, no, like I'm getting kind of screwed. I feel like in life in general, or like the big man in the sky, or the big man that represents this organization, they have tons of money and are kind of screwing people. Now, I might not actually have a lot of knowledge about that, but in general, I've heard things like that. I mean, this is kind of
CEO is on his $10 billion yacht and I can't get a $2
which
raise.
is valid, which is
valid.
But what ends up happening is this quietly quitting is this, action of, I'm just going to barely show up, if at all. Really, I'm just going to kind of fake it, or I'm going to just do the very minimal that I'm demanded. I'm not going to actually give it my all. And some people are like, yay, that's the right thing to do. Not only, you were only hired for one job, so just barely do the bare minimum. And then other people are like, what happened to work ethic and like trying and, like showing up and like being your best just because you believe it's your best.
Right.
And people are having this moral argument, this ethical argument about what's okay to do. And, some people call it boundaries and other people are like, that's cheating or that's stealing and we are kind of like deciding as a culture right now. We're in the middle of deciding like, what should be expected of you? Should you only phone it in, or should you be required and be held accountable for those things?
This is so interesting because I remember I didn't quietly quit as a kid. It just wasn't really an option for me.
We didn't. That construct did not exist. Yeah.
But I do remember there was a time I went out on a job making Davis-Bacon wage, which, is an act that, anyway, it's a long story.
Federal act where they pay a good wage for a certain job where there's like, you're working for the government.
And I was insulating. And so I had $36 per hour. And I think it was $14.
Which was
fringe.
So much money.
It was like $50 an hour or something like that when you're 17 years old, and making a lot of money. And the contractor that I was working for sat me down because we were going on a state job to build a school in rural Alaska. And he sat us down and he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. It's Davis-Bacon for the first 8. And then we go back to our regular overtime wage during, overtime hours, even though we're out here. We call it banking hours. We're going to bank hours. And that's the way I got the job. And so if you guys can agree to that, then I'll take you. We can do it.
Which basically by law, he was supposed to pay you Davis-Bacon and then Davis-Bacon overtime.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and even that's kind of weird because it's like double time or something.
Right.
It's not just time and a half. And then there's all this there's a lot of red tape. And so all the guys bidding these jobs are bidding based on Davis-Bacon and Davis-Bacon overtime and all these other type of, ethical standards for, and that's the reason why Davis-Bacon Act even came on, is because
people
the unethical treatment, the unethical treatment of. And so anyway, we're at Denny's and we all go, yeah, of course we'll bank hours. Let's go, man. We're all going to make, $5,000 or $6,000 a week, which is more than we've ever,
millions.
It's back in the, 1990, whatever it was. And so we go out there, we do the job. I come back. I end up getting in a fist fight with this guy because he's just so unethical in every other way on that job. I get,
lots of stuff he did.
Lots of stuff that he did. By the way, I took him down. It was no problem.
We're not advocating violence.
No, but it was one of these things. Anyway, 2 years later, an auditor comes and knocks on my door and says, hey, we're auditing this contractor that you used to work for. Is there anything you'd like to say? If so, then you're going to have to meet us at this place on Monday. And we'd like to hear, take your sort of almost like deposition, right? And I remember thinking to myself, sweet dude, I'm going to get a lot of money because I was only getting time and a half and we were working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. So half your money basically should have been at a way better
way more than half because 16 hours, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
There's 2 extra days.
You're right.
It would have been a lot of money actually for me. And I remember I talked to a father figure of mine during that time, who's, he's just one of the gruffest guys. He's like, pour the tequila out of your boots and get back to work. You know what I mean? Like one of these guys.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I said, hey, what do you think I ought to do? And he goes, well, did you make your deal? When I said, yeah, well.
Your deal with the contractor?
With the contractor, you sat down at Denny's and you told him that you're in, right? You made the deal. And then he goes, that's called integrity. if you made a deal with him, why are you going back on him now and screwing him over? And I thought, ooh. And so he was like, this is up to you and what you believe about yourself. It's not what you believe about money or any of these other things, but you made your deal, and it's called integrity. And I thought to myself, man, it was like, and so I didn't go. I didn't go and go get my money. I was confronted with the fact of what I value more.
Wow.
My integrity, my moral conviction, that what my resolves are, or was it what is ethical and legal? And, you know, all of these other standards, like someone else might have given me the advice of like, you owe it to America. You owe it to the Davis-Bacon Act to out this guy. He's a criminal. You know what I mean? But that wasn't the hand that I was dealt in that moment. And this was a person whom I looked up to. And I made what I believe is the right ethical and moral choice.
Because that's, you used what?
Your word is your bond in that industry.
Yeah. So this is what's important, right? This is why this has to do with relationships.
Absolutely.
And you said it perfectly when you said, like, just because someone else is behaving in a way that I know is wrong and or better, I like it better said, just because you're not being who you said you'd be,
doesn't mean I get to be anybody other than myself, who I've said I'm going to be.
Yeah, who I've said I'm going to be.
And I watched that contractor get filthy rich. Beautiful trucks and extravagant. It's hard to take when you know he's screwing everybody around. Yeah,
but you know, you just gotta trust that like that stuff's gonna come around.
Yeah,
but we all have to approach these things and understand that like nobody's doing everything exactly by the book all the time, and what you view as by the book may be based on ignorance, maybe what somebody told you. It might be really knowledgeable and really accurate, but even so, somebody else has lived experience that's a little bit different than yours.
Absolutely. Which is why I love it when you start talking like this. And we start talking about, wait, that's a moral standard you're talking about there, or that's an ethical thing that you're talking about there. I loved it when you brought me into that whole idea. I'm like, I want to take your class just because it helps me to go, you know what? No, I have some really moral convictions that I love. Yeah. That I'm really proud of, that I'm like, I don't know that I'm going to change that. Yeah. And I know that I'm not really able to project that same moral conviction on someone else or, you know, require them. But on the other hand, I really appreciate this concept because I can say to someone like, hey, what you're doing is unethical. And you know what? You need to change that. And it's not based on my like little assumption. It's based on what we've all we've all agreed to. We've all agreed to this, and you're the odd man out, and you need to hear that. Like that's a really important concept. Yes. Because we live in this age where it's like everyone's sort of scared of each other and we're not speaking up, or we are speaking up as long as it's like this. You know what I mean? And so for me, this is just such a helpful framework. Yes. And it's in your relationships, sit down and actually, not just even just as a couple, but in your communal relationships, you know, if you have a group you hang out with or friends or your work, it's so important that you actually sit down and go like, what do we believe is the right behavior? Yeah. Before it comes up. That's such a good point. What do we believe is the right and wrong behavior in a situation? And what's the ethos we're going to create? What's the standard of ethics we're going to create here that we're going to hold ourselves to, even if it's not a law, even if it's not a moral issue, even if, how are we going to decide it's okay to act? And, you know, what is okay between us? And on a personal level, just like an intimate relationship, we can decide like, what's appropriate behavior what have we both decided? I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've talked to women where they say things like I had a girlfriend who said, you know, her husband had been sexting this other woman for a long time. And a group of us girlfriends were like all pissed off about it. And we're like, God, what a, you know, dump his ass, you know, this kind of thing. Yeah. Right. And we finally just said to her, like, what's his argument about that? Because he was like, you know, I don't know why you're freaking out. And the argument was, we never even talked about if sexting was cheating or if that was appropriate. That was what he said.
And all of us were like, that should be a duh. That should be like hey, that's not. But in some ways, he had a point. They hadn't decided together what monogamy was, what that encompassed. If other, was porn cheating, was sexting cheating, was flirting at work cheating, was just being really emotionally connected with somebody else cheating. I've heard people describe cheating as such a huge range of action.
Oh man, when I came into your world,
the religious world,
I got thrown into, an accountability group, whatever it was like very you fish out of water kind of thing. And listening to these guys talk about how many divorces were going on over guys watching porn.
Sure. I
was like, totally different moral standard. Because when I came...
You're not saying that was actually totally wrong or like...
No.
Now but you were like, I didn't...
Well, when I was growing up, it wasn't super immoral to have a Playboy by the toilet or like, it was just pictures. It was just like guy stuff.
You wouldn't have considered it cheating.
Of course not. Not cheating. I mean, it might be like, dude, pervert much like that, but it was not. There was no way that it was on that kind of a moral or ethical level.
Yeah.
And I remember, you don't remember this, but I do remember the first time you ever walked into the shop that I was working at for Willowdale. There were all of these Makita girls. So they have Makita calendars. Yeah. That, it's a chick in basically naked.
Yeah.
Holding a screw gun.
I was so offended.
And it was like, you couldn't believe that I could stand to work under that sort of tension. And why haven't I torn down? Because it was like, every room, bathroom, of these, every corner has like the beer girl or the Makita girl or the Chevy girl or the Snap-on girl, and it was like, that's just sort of an American culture thing.
In a wood shop.
But
I was like, that was, I just couldn't believe that was the standard.
You'd never seen it before.
No, it was really, really alarming to me.
And ever since I was a baby, every shop, I grew up in shops. Yeah. And that was what it was. Yeah. That was what it looked like.
Yeah. So there's a difference there. And
crazy.
We will define things by a certain way. But how important is it that you have those conversations as a couple or as a community and you say, this is what we believe is the right and wrong kind of behavior for the good of us all. And there's reasons people decide on what's good and bad.
Yeah.
It could be just that belief system of virtue. It could be that you want to avoid certain consequences as a group. It could be that you really just believe that it's the right of individuals to have this, or it's your duty to perform this. There's all sorts of ways you could make those decisions.
Yeah.
But the point is that the decisions need to actually be made and they need to be talked about.
One of the best lines I remember was we were on the Colonial Walk in Boston, and we were, he was talking about how America was formed. And one of the lines in the, formation of America, one of the lines this guy used, he was like this poet guy dressed up.
He was awesome.
He was great. He was fantastic. Very theatrical. I loved him. And one of the lines he used was, what was once treason is now freedom of speech.
Wow.
And I was like, oh man, talk about exactly what we're talking about. The idea of ethics.
How it changes.
Well, and it was treason to talk like they were talking at one point. But we're all going like, that was freedom of speech now. It's like.
Right. Well, and in relationships, I read an Esther Perel quote the other day that was awesome, where she said, monogamy used to be one partner for life. Now monogamy is one partner at a time. And
wow,
but that's true.
Queen Esther, she nails it.
It's true. Right.
Yeah,
so that has become the new standard. So all of this is just to say, like, we have a limited perspective.
Yes.
In order to have true choice, in order to actually, to have true knowledge, you really do need to know more than just your side.
Yeah.
You need to build empathy, and talking about things, having those discussions builds empathy, builds understanding, helps with, bridging that divide.
Yeah. And I just love reminder of, man, I am reminded again that I am the only one who thinks like I think. And that my moral convictions are not necessarily the standard with which we should, base all ethical behavior. But at the same time, so it's so nice to be able to differentiate between those two worlds.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I am going to influence.
Yes.
I am going to influence the ethical behavior around me, right? And I can say, hey, these are the morals I live by. And it's not unethical for you to break those morals, but at the same time, these are based on some knowledge.
Yeah, and when you have people that have really strong moral convictions about something, they do kind of change the vibe of what is considered ethical. I was reading this is just to end this, but in that book, Predictably Irrational, or Predictable and Irrationality, I can't remember the title, but
we'll link it or something.
Yeah. They did a study where they had people go in to take this test, and they were gauging if they were going to cheat or not. They made it very, very easy for them to cheat. But before they walked in to take the test, they had them write down. There was one group who had to write down the last 10 books they read in elementary school, or like 10 books they read in elementary school was the thing. And then they went in and like tested if they cheated or not. And then they had another group that they said, write down the 10 commandments. And then they went in and took the test. You know what's crazy? The people who wrote down the 10 commandments didn't cheat at all.
Wow.
Now, it's not that they were a more moral character than the people who just wrote down the books. It's that for some reason, the writing down of those things before they went in to do an action was a reminder to them that there was like this standard that even if they didn't adhere to it, there was a standard of kind of moral behavior in their mind. And it basically kind of took cheating off the table for that short period of time when they were in the study. And that to me was fascinating.
That's so fascinating.
Maybe they don't actually believe in the Bible. Maybe they don't believe in the 10 Commandments, but just the presence of a really strong moral framework curbed corrupt behavior.
It reminds, I think a good reminder of the fact that, wait, I do have moral standards.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is good stuff to talk about. It's kind of interesting. Maybe you could have a conversation with your partner about like, what do you think is, asking fun questions like that. How many miles an hour could you drive over?
Yeah.
Would you feel like it's wrong to pull the plug? Would you, like all of these kind of things are really fun conversations to have.
I think it is. Yeah. What a cool relationship tool, whether it's just between you and I, or it's between you and coworkers or the surrounding world, all of that stuff. Yeah. Really helpful.
Yeah.
Wait, babe, wait. How do we end this?
By saying thank you.
Okay. You guys are awesome. Thank you. There's nothing more encouraging than you hitting that like button and commenting.
And don't forget to subscribe.
And I know there's more. You have a list. Might as well go down the list.
Right. Okay. Watch the video of this podcast on our Beautiful Step YouTube channel or on our website where you can actually download transcripts and show notes of the episode. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
If today's episode made your together even better, tell someone.
Okay. Now.
Right now.
Today.
Okay.
You can take one step.
It's just one step.
Toward the beautiful relationship you want in your life.
You got this.